The Belgian Grand Prix at the iconic Spa F1 circuit. We've had some interesting noises coming from the drivers, a couple of them pretty fearful about what to expect from this coming weekend at Spa-Francorchamps. Max Verstappen expecting it to be painful because of the energy-starved nature of these 2026 cars, and Oscar Piastri expecting this track and maybe some others on the future calendar to be sad. Ed, what do you think we can expect from Spa this weekend? Are these worst fears going to be realised?
Well, the worst fears are never quite realised, are they? We had this at Silverstone, but actually, while it wasn't great, it wasn't quite as bad as feared, and inevitably we all latch on to the worst possible expectations. But there is a legitimate concern, just as there was at Silverstone, because Spa is a very, very long track. It's 7 kilometres, so just under 4.4 miles. It's about, 16 seconds longer, certainly last year, on a qualifying lap. And we have this energy equation that's a huge challenge. And on top of that, a track configuration that's very, very odd, because it's kind of a Sector 2 sandwich in that Sectors 1 and 3 are lots of long straights, lots of full throttle stuff. And Sector 2 is not exactly slow, but it is the twisty bit. So you've got a weird lopsidedness there, just as we had at Silverstone, but a different challenge, but same concerns that there isn't enough energy to go round.
Yeah, the Silverstone thing, obviously there was a lot of fear-mongering, if you like, pre-race. Lewis Hamilton mentioning that the drivers' WhatsApp group chat was abuzz with chat, having been on the simulator, saying, it's going to be awful for these cars. And it wasn't great, but as you say, there was a kind of feeling that it wasn't as bad as expected. Maybe there was a bit of drivers kind of towing the PR line there too, but certainly you could see obvious energy starvation on the run from kind of Luffield all the way pretty much to the club chicane. So Spa, obviously you mentioned it's a lopsided track and you've got that middle sector with all the twisty bits in it. Is that going to be enough in combination with the other things that are put in place in terms of straight line modes, etc., to mitigate this energy challenge? Or is just the sheer length of this track going to mean it's going to be the worst bits of Silverstone, but times a factor of 2, 5, 10 or whatever?
Yeah, I can't say exactly what the mathematics are in terms of how worse it is, but yeah, ultimately you can mitigate the problem. You can't eliminate it. So some action has been taken. Originally, there was going to be an 8 megajoule recharge limit for a qualifying lap. That's dropped to 7 megajoules. Now, that means that you're going to have to rely less on lift-off, harvesting or super clipping when you're flat chat, but you're fully engaging the MGUK to harvest. That's a very power-sapping exercise. So they've tried to calibrate it to minimise the amount of that lift-off or super clipping you have to do on a qualifying lap. There'll still maybe be a couple of seconds, but a lot less than if there was 8 megajoules. And basically, that middle sector, which is the twisty bit, you aren't going to be deploying very much at all there, because you really need to have as much of that power as you possibly can for that long run. There's basically 2 kilometres of full throttle pretty much from La Source to Les Combes, and then at the end of the lap it's well over 1.5 kilometres from Stavelot at the bottom of the hill up to the bus stop, and there's 2 straight line modes there that you need to deploy through. So there have been mitigations. It's not quite as bad as it looked like it was going to be, because at one stage there was talk pre-season about having no straight line mode from Stavelot all the way to the bus stop chicane, which would have been power-sappingly mundane to say the least. But now there are 2 straight line zones through there, so you can have your active aero deployed, then you basically go through the area around Blanchimont, and then you have another blast again to the final chicane. So they've tried to just bias it a little bit so the equation isn't quite as painful, but you're still going to have a lot of the lap where you cannot deploy maximum power, which would be full V6 power plus the full MGUK power, and that will be frustrating. But the key thing is how much you're having to do it in the corners, and at least that has been mitigated, so they're not going to be kind of crawling around every turn at a painfully slow pace.
Well, that's a relief to hear. I mean, it sounds like from what they've done with the tweaks to straight line mode through the final sector, obviously that kinks quite a bit before you even get to Blanchimont. That probably is going to work fine. The run through turn 1, Eau Rouge up to the Kemmel Straight, that seems a bit more difficult. You've got some heavy braking at least into turn 1 to get some energy back into the battery, and maybe they'll use Eau Rouge as a little bit of a charging station for the Kemmel Straight. That bit to me seems tricky. But then once you get to sector 2 and you're into recharge mode and not using full power. Obviously, there is one really amazing driving challenge in that sector, Pouhon. That's really the kind of proper F1 corner now of that circuit, although everybody talks about Eau Rouge. Is that corner going to be the same driving challenge as we've been used to, or is it going to be completely neutered by the need to get energy back into that battery for sector 3?
It's probably the corner that will be most affected, in that it looks like it's going to be a full throttle one. Even on a qualifying lap last year, there was a need for a very sort of slight lift and take a little bit of speed off, but some of that you can do through your super clipping or whatever. So again, it's not a disaster, but I think Pouhon is the one you'll hear the most complaints about. But we will also see exactly what shakes out when they start running, because they do all these simulations, and then there's a few real world things to take into account. And of course, Spa is a little bit complicated as well, because you've got a lot of uphill areas as well and downhills, which does make a difference. As you said, you could super clip through Eau Rouge, but you're also going uphill there, so you've already got gravity sapping what you're doing. So there's some interesting trade-offs, and it's important to remember it's a three-dimensional track in terms of there being that elevation, which could have a little bit of an impact on things. But the thing to remember is that on a qualifying lap, well, on any lap, even if your pack is full, your battery pack is full, that's basically 11.4 seconds of deployment. And basically from Eau Rouge, from La Source to Les Combes, you're on that full throttle for longer than 11.4 seconds. So that kind of illustrates the challenge.
Yeah, very difficult one to make work. I suppose other things to consider are to do with car setup. This is normally a track where it's difficult to pitch your downforce levels correctly, but do you anticipate with this extreme energy starvation that everybody's going to trim their wings out as much as possible and just try to go for the maximum straight line speed for the minimum drag?
Very likely, yes, because that's the best approach when you're dealing with this energy-starved regime. And to be fair, there was a time when Spa was really a proper setup trade-off, and you'd see, such and such is super quick in the middle sector, but they're a bit slow in sectors 1 and 3. But actually, over time, it's become more and more a lean it out as much as you can, because that's where the lap times ended up being. So this isn't a dramatic change, but it's more likely to be, at the lower end of the spectrum for what you do at Spa. It's interesting because the level of downforce you have will affect how much of an effect there is in terms of having to harvest. Because, for example, if you were to go with kind of a more old school medium downforce level, you might find yourself in a corner like Pouhon actually being sat within the grip limit. And so by grip limited, it means basically when the car is limited in terms of how much power you can put down and how you're driving it by the available grip, but that would make it a bit more power limited. But I think with the downforce levels people are going to be running, that makes that less likely. So actually there's some aspects of the way setups evolved anyway, and the setups you'd want with this power unit and car package, that mean that that's partly baked in as a mitigation. So it's going to be there, and there will be teams looking very, very closely about exactly how much downforce they want to run, but my expectation would be that it'd be lower downforce for the most part. But it would be great if we see some variation as well, because that always makes things interesting. But everybody will come down to very similar solutions in terms of that wing level, obviously allowing for the differences from car to car.
Yeah, there's a good chance, speaking of variation, of our first wet race of the season as well. I think, having looked at the forecast before we head to Spa, there is some chance of rain, particularly towards the business end of the weekend. So we could be seeing these 2026 cars with their aggressive power delivery trying to be tamed on a wet Spa-Francorchamps. That could be quite fun. Obviously, we've been quite negative in this discussion because of the comments that I mentioned at the top of the show, and just a general feeling that we're just always talking about mitigation and problems with this formula. But I want to put the devil's advocate side of this to you, because there's an interesting quote from Gabby Bortoletto, who was asked about Spa and the challenges of the racing and the general difficulties with these cars post Silverstone. And he said, "I don't think it lost the magic of the sport. I think we should turn the page. We cannot spend 3 years talking about the same problem. The cars are still fun to drive. It's different. We need to adapt to that." What do you think of the point he's making? Because it's kind of at odds with how most drivers feel at the moment.
Yes, I mean, these are still difficult cars to drive. They're still very, very quick and all of those things. So it's not like they're driving around in a bunch of cars they've just taken from the nearest hire car company or something. So it's not that. But I think it is important to talk about it for several reasons. Firstly, because it's at the heart of understanding what they're trying to do in terms of performance. This is going to be a huge focus in terms of how you get the lap time, both over a qualifying lap and over a race lap. And of course, on a race lap, you have 8.5 megajoules of harvesting allowed. So a very, very different challenge to have that steady state running, and you can harvest more over a lap as well. So that there's different things going on, and that's central to understanding what's happening. So of course we have to talk about it, we have to understand it. Now, we know that the balance is wrong. And we know that the balance is wrong because, one, everybody's talked about it from the moment they first drove these cars, and in fact long before they ever did when they were driving them in the simulator, but also because changes are being made. We're going to see changes in 27 and 28 that are changing the balance of the V6 to the electric motor, etc. So that's clearly a problem. Now, we shouldn't talk about it in terms of, is it destroying F1? Okay, they've understood the problem, they're taking some action, good. But it is also important in terms of understanding the driving and the setup challenge. So I don't really think it's about moving on and turning the page, because it's not just about griping and complaining about it because you don't like it. It's about understanding. And that's the thing that everybody has to remember. This power regime, the way you harvest, the way you deploy, is absolutely critical to lap time. It's overpowering many other traditional driving elements. So the way the deployment works, you can't just pretend it's not there. This is performance in F1 right now. I don't think that's the way ideally it should be. There's still obviously driver skill in influencing that, but there's also elements where you drive a corner better and actually you're going to pay the price. There's still a reward for being more consistent on a qualifying lap than being on that kind of ragged edge and just sort of dancing on that tightrope, putting in those sort of hero laps, the Charles Leclerc style. So there are still problems. We should still talk about them, but we also shouldn't overstate them. It's still Spa. It's still a great circuit. There's still a great challenge, and it could be really interesting come the race. Say what you like about the yo-yo racing. It does mean cars are swapping positions, and we will see things happening in the race. So there's potentially some benefits there.